She has the credit of delivering keynote addresses in the seminars Yoga and Science History, Connections and Research, Curitiba, MT Brazil, on the workshop Improving the Personal Practice Challenges and Overcoming Curitiba, MT Brazil. She has developed several courses of improvement yoga for pregnant women, yoga therapy, respiratory techniques, pranayams, anatomy, and kinesiology and mantras. I now hand over to you, esteemed and distinguished speaker for today's workshop, Dr. Claudia Wanessa Poletto. Namaste and thank you.
Namaste. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank a lot to Dr. Arya for this invitation. I feel extremely honored and grateful to be here with all of you. So I would like to share my screen about my presentation. So just 1 second, and I apologize for the previous error that my connection was not good. So today, sirs and ladies, I would like to talk to you about this topic related to yoga and science, which I'm calling here a contemporary dialogue. And just a second. Yes. So everyone knows here that today we are celebrating the International Day of Yoga. So this is a very important date in terms of around the world, because we are giving our attention to a specific day that we are united towards to yoga. So when this started from the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, he told that yoga could be understood as a holistic approach to health and well-being. It's not about exercise, but to discover the sense of the oneness with yourself, the world, and the nature. So this is very important because among us 270 members, everyone said yes without any hesitation that today could be celebrated the International Day of Yoga. So here we are today. So in terms of to understand this approach, the yoga nowadays, I would like to tell you about the yoga around the world, science as a vector. And here we can understand vector from the Latin, literally as a carrier. So yoga became a transnational from India and spread it around the world. As you can see, I'm from Brazil, I'm Brazilian, but I do practice yoga and I do study yoga. So why I'm saying that? Because here we can see in this graph the yoga and the increase of scientific papers. And as you can see, there's a huge increasing for the last 20 years. So in this sense, we have this approach of science and yoga. So we are going to talk about a little bit of this kind of a relationship. So I start here to point out 8 reasons to research yoga in the sciences. So the first one I call here the body and mind approach. So in one side we have yoga as a holistic, and the other side we have the modern science that divided mind and body, and the yoga approach trying to unify this body and mind. And if we go back in days, we see that the French philosopher, like he understood that mind, I think therefore I am, or body as a machine. But it's totally different when we are talking about yoga, because yoga is based on a different paradigm, because it is integrative, relational, holistic, experiential, universal, and also this is very important to say, it is all about consciousness. So the second point that I would like to bring to you, this audience, is about yoga practices as a universal methodology for well-being, health, and also self-knowledge. So it doesn't matter if the gender, doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter the religion, is just because this universality of yoga can embrace everyone. The third aspect, and I think this is really, really important, they call about medicalization of yoga. This term of medicalization was called by a scholar, Elisabeth de Michelis. And here I would like to emphasize the therapeutic effects about yoga and how this is so important to science today. So in this aspect is these non-invasive interventions, no toxic, and no medicine based. And the most important is there is no conflict of interests. Why? Because there is no patent in yoga. So I was talking about this relationship between yoga and science. And also now I would like to point out the 8 reasons that it's my hypothesis. So how yoga became so important around the world through the sciences. So as I said before, the body and mind approach, as we can see, like the yoga approach is totally different than the modern science, because modern science divided the human being mind and body. So this is a very unique approach. So we can see from the historical perspective, since the French philosopher Descartes, where he thought about the mind is divided from the body, and here yoga is totally different paradigm. As I said before, integrative, relational, holistic, experiential, universal, and very, very based in consciousness. So the second point that I would like to justify why yoga is so spread in the sciences, because yoga is a practice as a universal methodology for well-being, health, and self-knowledge. It doesn't matter gender, age, religion, race, anything. And the third point about this kind of cult, or like medicalization of yoga, but especially the therapeutic effects of non-invasive interventions, non-toxic, non-medicine based. So this is a very brilliant thing related to yoga, because there is no patent, there is no conflict of interests. So yoga is practically uncorruptible when applying in the sciences. So the number 4, as we're saying about the yoga in the sciences, this relationship, not only the health sciences, but also like social sciences and humanities, we can see yoga as a way and a style of life. This is a very rich theme that, for example, anthropology, sociology, psychology, they study how people became, for example, yoga instructor, and so on and so forth. So we see today like many yoga studios around the world. We see like yoga as a profession, and we see as well yoga as a spiritual practice. So in this sense, all these themes go to the social sciences or humanities for researching purposes. The number 5, I would like to point out here about the literature, especially in Sanskrit. So these aspects of yoga in historical, philosophical, and epistemological sources. And here, as you all of you know, the brilliant work that Dr. Arya has related to Sanskrit, especially the Vedic Sanskrit. So the number six, as well, the archaeological perspective. So yoga in artifacts, sites, and monuments. As I brought here an example, this scholar from Harvard University in this Journal of Yoga Studies related to the only to the asanas found in sculptures or monuments or historical sites in India. So this is like a narrative of yoga through the archaeological perspective. So here, of course, as we know, there the Pashupati seal or the Mahayoga seal, as some calls. So this tiny piece is now in National Museum in New Delhi, in Connaught Place. I have this opportunity to visit and to see that little piece of history, and also the history of yoga together. So I really recommend you, if you don't have ever been there, I really recommend, because is worth it. So the number seven I would like to point here, it is about this very a very interesting aspect of yoga, the mind of matter. So how a mind can overcome very harsh conditions, like low temperatures, like a very severe winter, or other conditions that the ordinary human being couldn't stand. But some yoga techniques, so the person can achieve some goals. So this as well brought the attention to the sciences. And the number eight is not usual, but it is the extrasensory perception. What do you call here, like a ESP? And I point out this example of Dr. Dean Radin. He's a chief scientist of Institute of Noetic Science, and he wrote this book about supernormal science, yoga, and evidence for extraordinary psych abilities. And it's very interesting to point out that all his work is based in Vibhuta that you can find from the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So we see this parapsychology researching as well. So yoga, the number eight. And here, the last, I was talking about this, the number eight, the extra sensory perception, how this is yoga can be researched under the scientific lenses. But it's very important to know, but how did it start? So understand the beginning of the dialogues between science and yoga. And I would like to, the first person that I would like to point out here is the Sri Yogendra. His brilliant work, he founded the very first the yoga institute in the world, still nowadays. So he founded in 1918. And here, as we can see, Sri Yogendra, and with the Dr. Surendranath Dasgupta as well, the brilliant philosopher, Indian philosopher. And what Sri Yogendra did was a very, very simplified books about yoga, but very profound as well. And also, we can watch right now. I would like to ask your attention. It's only around 10 minutes. The very first documentary made by the government of India in association with the Yoga Institute, that I would like to show to you. And in a historical perspective, this approach between yoga and science together.
আচ্ছা, अरे वो थोड़ा तंग हो जाते हैं ना, यूरोप किया ना मैंने, ये पता लगे ना, मैंने स्विच ऑफ कर दिया, उसको फिर बाद में ध्यान आया, मगर ये बार बार घुसा है ना आता रहे।
Also a very simple. So the first one that I told to you, the Sri Yojendra, and the second one, I'm pretty sure that you know him, is Swami Kuvalayananda. Here we go. So the second one, who started this approach between yoga and science. So here we go. He found here some pictures of him, and also his experimental in lab. Here we go as well, some more pictures of him. And he found the very first journal, still today, called Mimamsa. It is a peer-reviewed journal of yoga. And he also started this connection between yoga and science. So we can point out to some historical agents during the 20th century. So like N.C. Paul, Yojendra, Kuvalayananda, Swami Sivananda, many from India, and as well some foreign people, even from Brazil. And not to mention some important figures that could help the spread of yoga around the world, but not exactly through the scientific approach. But let's go back a little more in time, mid and late 19th century. So I would like to start this short break with N.C. Paul. His book, A Treatise on Yoga Philosophy, first edition in 1851. So he was a doctor from the Calcutta Medical College, and he wrote the first book on yoga through a scientific approach. But it's interesting to point out that the same book was launched by a Theosophical Society in 1888. What I'm saying to you about this, the Theosophical Society, because Theosophical Society, especially in the Western world, helped to spread yoga and the Indian thought around the world. So I really strongly recommend as well his book, A Treatise on Yoga Philosophy, N.C. Paul, as you can see. It's very interesting because as he had this background in medicine, and he put together with the yoga that he knew some yogis from Benares, or today's Varanasi, of course, and he started to describe the yoga techniques. It's very, very interesting. But as I was saying before, the Theosophical Society, we cannot forget the very, very huge influence of the movement of Arya Samaj over Theosophical Society, founded by Swami Dayanand Saraswati, as Dr. Arya here knows very well. So he had a very, very huge influence over the Theosophical Society, and then that they published the second edition of the book of N.C. Paul book. But let's take a step forward in our times, and here I would like to show you examples of yoga in scientific papers nowadays. What I'm trying to say, is almost a yoga in the labs. For example, here, this paper from the US, in the posture about Shirshasana, the headstand, we can see all these measures trying to analyze the yogasanas, in this case, Shirshasana. So this is the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies, and the name of the paper is Shirshasana Headstand Technique, Alter Head Neck Loading, Considerations for Safety. It's interesting because I took 3 examples of the same posture, like a Shirshasana, in a different countries. Here's in my country, Brazil, as well, in a different perspective on, for example, Shirshasana. So we can see in this picture the apparatus trying to measure the effects of a Shirshasana. Here's the paper, the Journal of Sport Sciences, the geometric curvature of the spine during the Shirshasana, the yoga's headstand. And the third one that I would like to show you is from Russia, the same posture, the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. So here they used ultrasound examination. So we can see this different kind of methodology to analysis specific asanas. So this is 3 examples of 3 different researchers on the same posture. Another example that I would like to bring here is yoga as a therapeutic process for healing. For example, this is from in the US, American paper, American research, yoga for persistent fatigue in breast cancer survivors. So published in the Cancer Journal. It's interesting because they used the Iyengar yoga method. And they found out, for example, the yoga decreases insomnia symptoms in such a women, as we can see here, the results. Another example of yoga as a therapeutic process for healing is this very, very interesting research from Iran, Tehran University, and they applied yoga practice in children. And what they found out that the yoga group had a reduction in severity on autism spectrum of 7.54%, while the control group had an increase of 0.79. So the control group, that the group that didn't do anything, and the yoga group did yoga classes. And it's interesting because the researchers was not yoga instructors, was the researchers of this paper. They taught yoga to the kids. So another example that I would like to bring here, the yoga nowadays, is, for example, the yoga as a mind over matter challenge. And this is the second that I found, the Russian paper, the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. They applied in 2 groups, the Tumu yoga. They perform this yoga technique in very, very low temperatures, as you can see, -10, -15. So people who practiced Tumu yoga and people who didn't. And the result was the people who did had a very better performance than the other group that didn't know about the Tumu yoga. This self-heating technique to stand in the very cold temperature. And of course, nowadays, very, very famous, the meditation responses in the brain, especially in the neurosciences. We can find many, many papers related about the response of meditation or yoga through the neurosciences lenses. So that I would like to bring here to you all audience is yoga in the sciences is different than yoga as a science in the context of modern science paradigm or materialism. So one thing that what we saw here, especially these previous slides, that yoga in the sciences in a different perspective could be for depression, diabetes, or any other themes of our researches. And as well, we can say that yoga as a science, but not in this materialistic way of the modern science is based today. So yoga is very sophisticated, as we can, for example, research on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali's or Hatha Yoga Pratipika. We see this sophistication. But here, what I would like to be very clear is this circulation of yoga in the sciences, not only in the health sciences, but also in the social and humanities. So the second point that I would like to say is that thousands of scientific papers are pointing out its effects on health, which could be endorsed as a public policy, for instance, mild depression. And we have several papers saying that for mild depression, hatha yoga or yoga meditation works really well. The third point here, that yoga doesn't have a patent, and when it's well taught, leads to a cheap intervention with no side effects. And the last, modern science should enlarge its vision and methodology to comprehend the vast human potential of healing and self-enhancement by having the support of yoga approach on its researches. So yeah, so I would like to thank you, all of you, for your attention, and apologize for these problems. And I do appreciate all of you. Thank you so much, your time and your attention.
Anybody can ask any question if you want to ask a question.
Hi Ravi, I think there is one.
Yeah.
How did the term yoga and science change to a contemporary dialogue?
I'm sorry?
How did the term yoga and science change to a contemporary dialogue?
Could you repeat, please, the slowly, please?
How would you say yoga and science could be used in temporary dialogue? No.
Is that it? Yes, I think that I showed that these exchanges between science and yoga, it's not beneficial only to yoga as well. For example, I'm a yoga teacher and I'm teaching my students, and I have some scientific background about some postures or some breathing techniques that would help me to give the right instructions to my students, for example. And also the other side, yoga can help with science as well for this holistic approach, or this consciousness based technique, so that could bring to science more and more perspective about the human potential that is latent, is our inner being. But sometimes science wants only proven facts and trying to measure, And this kind of dialogue could be very rich for the both sides. It's my perspective from, for example, for scholars or for yoga community as well. I hope that I could understand your question.
Doctor, may I speak?
Yes, you can ask.
Yeah. Dr. Claudia, excuse me, I think one of your slides shows that study in Russia, as you said, mentions that headstand does not increase blood flow to your brain. Is that right?
What they found out was not the increase of blood itself, is only in the left carotid, is only in a specific carotid that they didn't find any significant, increase of flow of blood. But they highlighted only this specific left carotid.
Thank you.
Okay. And if you want, I can share you the paper because I have this paper.
Thank you, Claudia. Thanks a lot
Thanks
for
so much,
presenting this
Doctor.
beautiful paper, but there was some problem in between, so we are sorry for that.